If I think of the word analysis, although we might spell it in English with a Y, I would spell it I-S-I-S, iysis, analysis. In other words, the last four letters or the last two sounds of the word ISIS. Let me read to you a Google synopsis of what ISIS seems to stand for. Although initially an obscure goddess, Isis came to fulfill a variety of roles, primarily as wife and mother, mourner and magical healer. She was a role model for women, was a principal deity in rites for the dead, and cured the sick. She also had strong links with the kingship and the pharaohs. Now, isn't that astonishing that Isis should be the last two sounds in the word analysis? Well, you could say it's I instead of I, but you know. Okay, now the first part of the word, and now, which looks to me like anal. And if I now read to you what Google has as a helpful indication here. In a Freudian theory, it's relating to or denoting a stage of infantile psychosexual development in which defecation is the major source of sensuous pleasure, and the anus forms the center of self-awareness. Well, this sounds an appalling sort of a bit of discourse here. But if we think of what the word analysis now well, can I say seems to be rooted in as regards the sounds. We would say analysis could be expected, therefore, to be something psychological, mental, of thought, therefore, preoccupation, something going back to primeval, sort of, therefore, foundation, understanding of what's going on. An extremely secular word, in that it's, well, hardly elevating, is it? In some sense, it's saying it's a very basic thing. Primeval suggests from the very beginning of something, especially if you're of a scientific mind and think of an evolutionary theory approach to existence. The ISIS part suggests something of female care. The whole thing reflects an early stage of development and an approach to understanding. If we can think of our beginnings and how we come to be, you know, we're mothered into existence, aren't we? And, well, looking after the child in the early stages is nappies and so forth. It's very basic, isn't it? At the same time, it's the foundation of life. Without babyhood and childhood, we can't become adults in this world. It's to get an understanding, an overview of life, isn't it? And it is, I've used the word life. It is that, isn't it? It's the notion of primitive life, which is preoccupied with a very narrow view of self, one that clings desperately to survival and has to be preoccupied very narrowly to use resources to get through, so to speak. But at the same time, there's a motherliness going on, you see. The Isis, this goddess that gives of herself to protect and bring up the child, rescues you into a more permanent existence and a development towards adulthood. The word analysis. It's in the sounds. You could say, well, of course the word must have developed from something, and it's developed from, in some sense, an amalgamation or meaning of these two sets of sounds, which I've shifted to the hard vowels, but I've said anal and isis. Now, anal is very earthly, to put it politely, nicely, and Isis is very godly. She's a goddess, and the role model for women. How lovely. I'm thinking in Theosophy of a book by one of the founders, Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, who had wrote a book, Isis Unveiled, and of course Isis is the Egyptian. Is it just Egyptian or is it Persian as well? But anyway, ancient goddess. And, a god, therefore, in this sense of life. She's a mother of all. And when we analyze something, we're trying to find its separate parts and how it hangs together, how it's created, how it's come to be, how it's been birthed. Analysis, anal, Isis. We hold selfishness in contempt or distaste. It's unacceptable, but in fact, it may be of the mud and the earth, so to speak, in a allegorical sense. But from it we get the water lily, don't we? Out of this mud, this quagmire, grows this beautiful flower, a water lily. The lotus flower, the great symbol of the Eastern beauty of transcendence from the mud of the material world, so to speak. Analysis. Did we think of that in our cold science when we do an analysis of something? Or our cold medical investigation? It's a basic comprehension of creativity of the matter. Analysis. I couldn't say why we get from the A to the A sound and the I to the I sound. It's not anal-isis, it's anal-isis. Don't know why that's so. Have you got any ideas? Let me pause. Well, with that in mind, thinking of the word analysis and what we do, let me read that bit on iysis again to you. Okay. In Freudian theory, so this is psychology, isn't it? Our modern science, of social science of sorts, relating to or denoting a stage of infantile psychosexual development. So we're talking about the mind in analysis. It's psychological, it's of thought, it's what's going on in the head, so to speak, the way we think of it anyway. And a sexual thing, well, sexual things are to do with that which brings things into existence. Births something, doesn't it? There's a sexual act without it, without the genetic material coming together, we might say in physical terms, or some spiritual activity that brings life into existence. You don't get a person. Development in which defecation is the major source of sensuous pleasure, which is the getting rid of impurities. Hang on, this isn't now so, in the mud and gutter as you thought. It's purification, cleansing, getting rid of anything that obstructs life now, aren't we? A purity. Analysis. Analysis, the word means something to do with purifying our understanding. And it's something about thought, understanding, in other words. Sexual development, something to do with life. Fundamental thing, analysis. Major source of sensuous pleasure, and the anus forms the center of self-awareness. It's something about selfishness, self-awareness, the concept of a separate self. The very beginning of the notion of individuality. A narrow focus, a cleansing from everything else. We're bringing the self, person, into some sort of pristine development. An analysis is going on. Okay. Now, in case you think we've got, lost in the mud, so to speak, now let's look at the iysis bit again. Okay, what was iysis known for? And it said, although initially an obscure goddess, so we're talking about really the transcendent now, aren't we? This doesn't sound very scientific at all, does it? Isis came to fulfill a variety of roles, primarily as wife and mother, mourner and magical healer. This is what analysis does. Brings life, you see, wife. She comes to your rescue as wife of mother. Someone who mourns with you comes alongside to rescue you in your loss. An analysis, a loss of understanding. I need insight, I need godliness, you see, power, understanding, wisdom, and magical healer. It's the healing from above. Who would have thought analysis, the very meaning of the word springs from something to do with the miraculous. and healing. She was a role model. How's that? It's a teaching device. It's a copy this, we're back to the apprentice, aren't we? She was a role model for women, was a principal deity, a god in other words, in rites for the dead, coming to your understanding, you see, and your rescue in desperate bereavement. It's the presence of God come to help you, you see, and cured the sick. She also had strong links with the kingship and the pharaohs. And there we are, the Egypt, ancient wisdom and so on. Preoccupied with death, of course. We think of the pyramids as something to do with the dead. In fact, they seem to be much more something to do with meditation. The dead weren't even found in the pyramids. The dead, the mummies, are in the temple, which is, in a sense, at the foot of, beyond, outside the pyramid. That's where the body is, and the rich artifacts and so on that probably were stolen. But, yeah, I suppose modern man's stolen them in a sense, put them in a museum instead of their original place. Yeah. Okay. So who would have thought that the practice of analysing, the phenomenon of analysis, which we think of as so, scientific and secular and worldly and practical, had such a, emotive and religious type history to it. What I might step back and say is an extremely spiritual activity, analysis. And creative, something to do with birth and self, and the assistance or the provision of God, heaven, Isis, motherliness, birth, psychological understanding of the mind. It's to do with thought. All this background is crowding into something that we've taken as an everyday activity or word in our modern world. Well. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. I don't know quite what to draw from this conclusion, what conclusion to draw from this analysis. Except to say that life and thought and understanding is far deeper and far more spiritual than we ever suppose, and our language reflects it. Even with the most trivial tracking back of associations and where things seem to have come from and developed. That Manu, was it? The chap, you know my language. You know my God. By God we mean the foundation of all, both in historical terms and in terms of being. And we think of it, with some noble classical language like Sanskrit or something. But it seems to be just as much so of our modern languages too, which of course seem to have developed from such ancient languages. We have, in a sense, a more reliable history and philosophy, religion, if you like, understanding, built into our language than is in our history books. But our history books and our encyclopedias, or in the modern world, our AI, and gives us access into a panorama of meaning and makes sense of it all. Of questions that we've been struggling over for years. I've said, haven't I, that our myths and fables and legends and stories and fairy tales are far more important than we suppose in our understanding. And what I mean by that, therefore, our very being, what life is, who we are, our personhood. Wow. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.